This video primarily and briefly documents the demolition of Elkesley pumping station, the McBarron pumping station. Historically, water for the city of Lincoln was taken from surface water sources within the city with very little treatment. In the early part of the 19th century, a very serious typhoid epidemic broke out. Over 1,000 people were infected and well over 100 died. The Lincoln Corporation decided that a new source would have to be found and new facilities constructed. A young engineer, Neil McKechnie Barron, was appointed to take charge of the project. Ultimately, it was decided to take water from the Bunter sandstone at a place called Elkesley near Retford in Nottinghamshire, and as part of the project 4 boreholes were sunk from which to extract the water. Water was conveyed to Lincoln by 21-inch diameter cast iron water mains passing over the River Trent at Dunham and on to a new reservoir constructed at Bracebridge Heath, and also onto a new water tower constructed at Westgate. A small water tower was also constructed on the Bracebridge Heath reservoir site to afford a supply to the higher parts of Bracebridge Heath. Westgate water tower was constructed to afford a supply to the higher land in the northern part of the city of Lincoln. The project began in 1907 and took 5 years to complete. A central part of the project, and the one most closely associated with this video, was the construction of a magnificent Victorian pumping station at Elkesley. The pumping station contained 4 boreholes sunk deep into the Bunter sandstone, but avoiding polluted water from the Nottinghamshire mining activity. Motive power for the pumps was via 2 triple expansion marine type steam engines. They were coal fired from 4 Lancashire boilers. The 2 450 horsepower triple expansion steam engines were named Livens and Janetta. Each drove 2 deep well pumps and a single high lift pump. The engines operated from August 1911 until October 1973. During this period, the engines pumped a total of 3 million gallons of water each day to the city of Lincoln. This view shows a big end of one of the engines. An overhead travelling gantry crane in the main pump hall serviced the 2 engines for maintenance purposes, etc. A sign erected in the toilet facilities within the pumping station. A photograph of the opening ceremony with the dignitaries of Lincoln. Mr. Barron is seated in the centre front row to the left of the lady wearing the bonnet, who I believe is his wife. What follows now is a record of a compilation CD I put together at the time when we began the demolition of the pumping station. I was not involved in the demolition contract from the outset. I joined Anglian Water in January 1979 and became involved in the project at that stage, at which time quite a lot of the triple expansion engines etc. had been removed, and one of the aspects I was involved in was overseeing the demolition of the chimney. We worked out that the chimney was 134 feet high, and there was a sort of joint decision that probably the best way to tackle its removal was in fact to blow it up. At the time it was proposed that one of the triple expansion engines, the one named Livens, would be saved and was fairly carefully dismantled and sent to the Welsh Industrial Maritime Museum in Cardiff. The next few pictures record the incident that happened to the Ginetta engine. It looks to me as if the little end on Ginetta failed, causing the piston to be blown out of the cylinder, destroying the cylinder cover, and immediately caused the engine to be shut down. Safety concerns arose as to whether it was acceptable to continue to run the other engine, and a decision was quickly taken to shut them both down and quickly install some electrically driven pumps to keep the water supply going. The day prior to the accident, a party of school children had in fact been on a visit to the pumping station. That was a fairly common occurrence. Mercifully, on the day the incident occurred, there was nobody in the pump hall when it happened, and no one was actually injured. In 1974 there was a fairly protracted public inquiry, I believe, before my time, but ultimately it was agreed that the station could in fact be demolished. Straw bales and earth were piled around the base of the chimney to try and limit the blast. The young lady is Caroline Drake, who was then the drawing office assistant. The gentleman to the left is Mr. Baber, a demolition expert. Unfortunately, I don't know the name of his assistant. The chimney appeared to go straight up when it was exploded and go straight back down, and I remember feeling rather concerned as to whether it would or wouldn't topple over. Eventually it fell and left a bit of a stump. The gentleman to the left is Tony Graham, Director of Kinmain Construction, and the gentleman on the right is Eric Newton, Principal Civil Engineer of Anglian Water. To the left, Mr. Baber, the demolition expert, a veteran, I understood, of many demolition exploits during the Second World War. What follows is some rather poor quality 8mm cine film that I took at the time using a rather poor quality and second-hand cine camera that I had. So I apologise for the quality, but I've included it as it does actually show the blowing up of the chimney in real time. The cine film did not record sound, and I have taken the liberty of adding one or two sound effects. Mr. Baber and his assistant worked from the bucket of a JCB, placing the dynamite into the shot holes that you saw being drilled in the previous clip. Fair to say, I think, that we were not as health and safety conscious in 1979 as we were subsequently, and certainly would be today. I had no previous demolition experience or explosive experience whatsoever, and I have to say, with a bit of hindsight, that the earth and straw bales we placed around the chimney base were not as effective as I had hoped in containing the debris from the explosion. The stump of the chimney gives good evidence of the strength and skill used by the Victorians in constructing the brickwork on this job. It really was sound. There was a small amount of peripheral damage to the roof tiles on the adjacent cottages used to house the workmen on the site, but nothing too much. We obviously made sure the cottages were unoccupied at the time of the explosion. Caroline from the drawing office looking rather pleased with the results of the devastation. Once the chimney was down, work began in earnest to remove the rest of the pumping station in order to provide a base for the construction of the replacement station. This shows the steelwork of the roof supporting structure in the main pump hall. Much of the demolition was actually undertaken by the traditional method of swinging a very large iron ball from the end of a crane. The basement area of the original pump hall was filled in and covered over, and partly used to support the new station, which was to replace the old one. This picture gives an idea of the size of the concrete foundation blocks that supported the two triple expansion engines. I mentioned earlier that the Livens engine was carefully taken down and transported to the museum in Cardiff for preservation. This part of the flywheel was one of the last items to go off site. I did learn some years later that the museum couldn't actually handle an engine of this size, and subsequently the whole thing was actually scrapped. The Bunter sandstone source was known to contain a considerable amount of debris, and each side of the station were settlement tanks to trap the debris, and these would need to be excavated out once or twice a year. With the roof removed, the arrangement of the walls to trap the sediment can be seen. You can only imagine what it must have been like with the roof on to go in there and dig the sand residue out in the dark. A final view of the original pumping station and a shot of the building which replaced it, built over the original engine house basement. I realise as engineer I was involved in the project, but I have to admit the Victorians made a much better fist of it. This mural graced the main entrance of the original pump building over the main door, and it was actually saved and re-erected adjacent to the new building. To facilitate the water supply from the new building to the Lincoln City, a number of pipework alterations had to be made, and here are some pictures of running a lead joint and cutting out various sections of pipe to make the alteration. This work was carried out by local distribution operatives, as even at that time very few people had the skills to carry out this sort of work, particularly running the lead joints, pouring molten lead into the joints to make them watertight. A final view from the rear elevation of the replacement pumping station.